It works. Hey, everybody. Hi. My name's David. I'm proud to be one of the pastors here at Faith United Methodist Church. Williams family, Datron, thank y'all for being here. Thank you very much. You're most welcome, and we are honored to have you. And to our visitors and guests, welcome. Welcome to Faith United Methodist Church. This is fun. I don't think we've done anything like this in a long time, but we'll do it more often. How about that? I love it when one of the not reverends pray, because y'all hear from me way too much. So one of our members, Michelle Perez, has written a prayer for this occasion, and I'm going to pass the mic on to her. Welcome to Faith.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Michelle Perez, and I'm a member here at Faith UMC, and I'm also a member of our social justice group that is putting on this event tonight. So thank you, everyone, for coming. If something touches you or you're thinking you might want to join, please come to our group meetings. We meet every Sunday at 10, and it's really a great group of people. So. If everyone would bow their heads, I wrote a prayer for today for this. Dear God, thank you for today. Thank you for our church. Thank you for bringing all these amazing people here today. Thank you, Father, for your word, and thank you for our words. Thank you for our ability to communicate and to be able to spread your word. And Father, speaking of words, I know there are some words that seem to trouble people, like the word woke. Though when defined, the word woke is simply defined as being aware of and attentive to important issues, particularly those of racial and social justice. And woke is just the past tense of wake, which can also be defined as to cause something, as in to wake a desire in others. So God, then, isn't being woke just empathy? And isn't our job as Christians to awaken a desire in others to be empathetic, sympathetic, and compassionate? God, you have taught us to love one another as you loved us, to show compassion in all our interactions with each other. No one should ever feel less than. And if you ever make a person feel less than, aren't you then criticizing God? God created us all in his image. We are all the likeness of God. So haven't we all one Father? So aren't we all brothers and sisters in Christ? All equal. Thanks to you, Father, we know salvation is for all people, no exclusions. And God, help us to live unto that, unto knowing that we are all equal, all in this together, and all soldiers of Christ. God, help us to break down any barriers, anything that may lead to exclusion or prejudice against anyone. Give us the wisdom and the courage to make this a better world, to speak up for those who feel they can't, to be the empathetic, sympathetic, loving Christians we know we should be. Again, I say, humankind needs to be just that. Be kind. So tonight, Father, open our hearts. Help us to be able to see with the eyes of another, listen with the ears of another, and feel with the heart of another. Help us to come together as one family, united for you and for the love of Christ. In your precious Son's name, amen. So thank you again for being here. I am honored to introduce our first speaker tonight. I absolutely adore him and his family. I think him and Maya are the most beautiful people I know inside and out. They have served our community in so many ways. Many of you already know Datron from how he served our community. He's a past president of the Conroe ISD School Board, where he served selflessly for 12 years. He was also on the board for the Montgomery County Women's Center. I'm so grateful that he's here tonight, so please help me welcome Datron Williams.
Thank you, Michelle. How's everyone doing? Can y'all hear me okay? All right, it's good to see everyone. Let me set some ground rules. I want y'all to all put your guards down and understand this is going to be a good dialogue, good discussion between brothers and sisters, so y'all be prepared for that. I usually start this off with some icebreaker or joke, but my wife is here and she told me that I need to mind myself and I have to be on my best behavior, so I'll refrain from doing that today and get in it. And I will be brief, so I'll be brief. That way we leave sufficient time for discussion. Greetings, my brothers and sisters. I will begin with what's custom for someone who's reared in a Southern Mississippi Baptist church, and I'll say, giving honor to Pastor David, the church elders, the Faith United Methodist Church at large, and specifically the Social Justice Ministry. Thank you, Michelle Perez, for your confidence in allowing me to share my perspective with you all this evening. I bring greetings to you as the senior pastor of the House of Williams. It's located in the Woodlands, Texas, where I serve as spiritual servant leader of a congregation of 4 strong. Will my parishioners please stand, some of my members of my church? That's just my wife. For those of you who didn't get that, that's my house. No, seriously, thank you guys for this opportunity to share. My 2 sons are on their way, by the way. Thank you for this opportunity to share my perspective with you. Now, if this were a sermon, Pastor, my title would be, Let's Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. When asked to share my perspective with you, I immediately asked my fellow Mississippian brother, Mr. Anthony Harris, what perspective can I possibly give that you could not give in a more eloquent and from a more deep-rooted account? His response was, sometimes it just helps to hear the same things from a different person. Look, I firmly believe that such topics are more suitable in an interactive format. Giving a speech or a sermon is a spectator activity. Instead, I want to ensure that we have sufficient time to have real discussion where we candidly exchange ideas and perspectives. Our dialogue here is intended to encourage, to inspire, to bring awareness of a different perspective, and maybe bring about some conviction. As we know, conviction is a good thing for a Christian. Conviction allows us to be more Christ-like. So I have multiple perspectives to share, and my disclaimer here is that I can only speak to my experiences. I cannot speak to the full black community experience nor any other community. Now let us dive into it. Let us get into this and let us get comfortable being uncomfortable. What should you know about the intersection of being black and my Christian faith? Well, this is Black History Month. It is a month where we should give homage to the contributions of a people who played a critical role in the history of this great nation. Why is there a Black History Month? To ask the question justifies the need for the month. I would ask, why is such a rich history of this group of people constantly at threat of being erased or whitewashed? Why are blacks seen as a threat to the majority superiority? Why do you learn so little about black history in our public schools? In Texas, our motto is, remember the Alamo. In the United States, it is 9/11, never forget. Across the world, it is remember the Holocaust. However, as to slavery and the rich history of blacks in America, we should put that behind us and let's just move on. Being a black man in America, I identify with the suffrage, the stereotypes, the misconceptions, and the hostility that has always been systemic in this great country, the levels of which have varied over the years, but the existence is live and well. Therefore, I must proceed with caution because my very life may depend upon it. James Baldwin, one of my most revered black writers and civil rights activists, once wrote, as to be black in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. Faith United, let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. Now I will speak to my identity as a Christian. Our faith in its true form is a beautiful thing. It is the truth and the light. I continue to believe that I have been saved by grace through my faith and certainly not by my works. Unfortunately, the gospel has and continues to be used as a weapon for self-serving and evil purposes. Thereby, it is incumbent on all Christians to study the Word of God and understand its true essence. Let us not forget that the KKK was an American Protestant-led Christian organization. Horace Mann wrote that education is the great equalizer in leveling the playing fields of opportunity regardless of background. I would argue that education, or your education of the gospel, it is the great liberator. It is a great liberator in understanding our true purpose. More simply put, the truth will truly set you free. Case in point, we live in a time where Christians believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are a political issue. No, my brothers, my sisters, these are humanity issues. Allow me to address now both racism and the Christian church. This is the intersection of being black and a Christian. An overwhelming number of my Christian brothers would contend that racism is not systemic in America, and most certainly not systemic in the Christian church. My response will be, folks, we have to cease this voluntary ignorance to the plight of our fellow Christian brothers. Otherwise, we all stand complicit in continuing this cycle of racism. Racism is characterized by or showing prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism against a person or a people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority. So now, again, let us get comfortable in being uncomfortable. Here are a few convicting questions. Would Faith United Methodist Church congregation attend here and worship so faithfully if Pastor David were a black man? How receptive would you be to a black supervisor in the workplace? Would you believe that God ordained and allowed the election of a black president of these United States? Would you welcome with open arms your new son-in-law or daughter-in-law if he or she were black? Your answers to these questions don't define you, but maybe we can begin to end our voluntary ignorance relative to race. In saying, hopefully, no one here will leave and ever say, I don't really see color. So what hope is there? Where do we go from here? Yes, I believe there is much hope of redemption. The hope that we will become more in tune with our true Christian calling. Hope of a time where we understand that our faith without works is a dead faith, and we see our Christian brothers as equals without race labels. Again, let us be comfortable in being uncomfortable. How do we put that into action? We do so by doing more of what we are doing this evening. We have the dialogue. We make an intentional act to get to know one another. We put fear aside, misconceptions aside, and we break bread with one another. We learn about and we learn from our rich shared history, all of our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Then, and only then, will we begin to have empathy for one another and stand united as real brothers in Christ. So now, Faith United Methodist Church, let us begin getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and begin an uncomfortable dialogue. Thank you. Appreciate you, brother.
I'm going to invite Dr. Anthony Harris. Hey, Anthony, come on forward, please. Oh, yeah, we got to move this.
Thank you, brother.
Datron, I've got a few seminary recommendations for you if you ever want one.
No.
You look pretty good up here. Thank you.
I appreciate
Thank you for who you are, for your clear vocation, and your leadership and your reflection of the gospel of Christ.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Harris, for those of y'all for those of our guests who don't know you, would you introduce yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me? Is this on?
Okay, you're fine. There you go.
Okay, you can hear me now, right? I am Smitty's husband.
Amen.
And just a point of personal privilege. Is she here? Right there. These eyes don't work like they used to. 48 years ago today, a young lady by the name of Smithia Frazier met me at the wedding altar at St. Peter AME Church in Port Gibson, Mississippi. Wow. 48 years ago.
That's good.
Someone reminded me you're just 2 years away from 50 years. And I said, that's just hard. But again, I greet you, and I'm glad everybody is here. My name is Anthony Harris, and I hail from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm glad to be part of the Mississippi duo here. And I grew up in the civil rights movement in Mississippi. I went to jail. I got spat on. I was called the N-word nearly every day. I desegregated a junior high school back in 1966. And a lot of who I am today in terms of my values and my principles and things that I fight for in terms of social justice come out of that experience in Mississippi in the 60s. And there are times when I get tired. I just get tired of fighting because I know the struggles that everybody went through in Mississippi and throughout the South during the struggle for civil rights. And people they refuse to give up. And again, there are times when I get tired. I've shared with the social justice group. One Sunday, Pastor David talked about throwing in the towel. And I went back to the group and I said, folks, I'm tired. I'm sometimes thinking about throwing in the towel. And thank goodness we have some members of that group who said, Anthony, we got your back. And I just want to acknowledge the members of the social justice group. Would you please stand? Don't be bashful. Come on, stand. All right. And that's not everybody. We have some people who could not be here tonight, and I'm just so grateful, and my heart is filled every time I'm with that group on 10 o'clock on Sundays. I don't know what else to tell you about myself. Right now, I'm the interim dean of the College of Education at Prairie View A&M University. And you will hear that name again, Prairie View A&M University, because we're scheduled on April 6th, first Sunday in April, to have a concert by the PVAMU Choir right here at Faith United Methodist Church.
And everybody's welcome. Like, invite everybody you can.
It's going to be something else for me. I guess that's about all I can tell you about myself. There's so much more to tell. I'm an author in addition to the other things that I do. And one of the books that I wrote is called Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. Grammatically, it's not correct. We know that. But it's the title of a freedom song that we used to sing in the 60s. It actually comes from an old Negro spiritual. And that's the title of the book, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Around. It's about my growing up in Mississippi, the civil rights movement, through the lens of somebody who was coming of age at that time. And I'm not plugging the book. I'm just saying it's out there if you want to read it. It's on Amazon, and I'll be happy to sign a copy if you're ready. David, I'll just leave it at that.
It's great. So, Datron, I was hanging on your every word. I am really both fascinated and kind of disturbed by your really excellent point that we emphasize remembering so much about the worst of human history. And yet when it comes to racism and slavery, we say, don't remember. That was a really powerful reflection for me. So I guess I want to begin our conversation with a note of remembering. I guess for both of you gentlemen, I invite you to remember. Tell us who in your own history modeled inclusion for you. Would you remember out loud for us who modeled inclusion for you?
You know, within the black culture, the black family unit, we welcome everyone. My grandmother modeled inclusion. Anyone walking down the street, anyone that needed something warm to eat, anyone that you brought into the household and said you love them, she loved them too. So it was no sense of looking down on anyone, feeling superior to anyone, because we felt that we were always in that place. So from her perspective, how dare us as a people ever ostracize or alienate or not welcome someone in. And so she was my model of inclusion. If I were to have a model of inclusion, I could bring home somebody I picked up off the street and said, I love them and this is who I want to marry. She said, well, if that's what you want to do, baby, you go right on ahead. And she loved them, and anybody else that showed up. If I showed up with 3 kids and she never seen them in her life, and I said, hey, Grandma, these are my new kids, I adopted, and she loved them and act like those kids were hers all her life, you know. So my grandmother was that person for me.
believed in was we're all in this together. He was driven by his Christian faith. Yes, he was a great civil rights leader, but he was also a man of God. He was somebody whose faith was manifested in everything he did. Not everybody saw it that way. That's why they wanted to arrest him. The FBI wanted him to put a bullet in his mouth, all those kinds of things. But he stuck with his religion. I'm so thankful that I had a chance to actually be in the same room with Martin Luther King. Yeah, March 17th, 1968. He came to Hattiesburg. Now, I'm not going to get into that story because it'll take too long, but it was just one of the highlights of my life to be in the same room, to listen to this man's oratory and just be moved by his, not just what he was saying, but the manner in which he was saying.
So, Datron, you said that diversity, equity, and inclusion are humanitarian issues. Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a human issue.
Human issue. So, I wonder what you would say, and you too, Dr. Harris, if I said that diversity, equity, and inclusion are faith issues. That these are core, each of these ideas are core to our faith as Christians. How would you respond?
I think it's one and the same. We're saying the same thing, tomato, tomato, if you will. I think our faith is about humanity. It's one and the same when we reference diversity, equity, and inclusion and make it a humanity issue and a faith issue. When we make it a politician or political volleyball, if you will, when we're hijacking it and then giving it an acronym to make it sound negative and ugly and taking and ostracizing one group over the other, that's when you travel down a dangerous path when you're taking godly, good human being type issues and you're making them political issues. I think Michelle mentioned one of those issues in her prayer. But the DEI, and we constantly say DEI because we don't want to say the words themselves, because the words themselves make you feel a certain way that, hey, we really shouldn't be seeing these things. If I stood to you one-on-one, I said, what do you think about diversity? You wouldn't tell me anything negative about it. If I said, what do you think about equity? Oh, that's a great thing, equity. What do you think about inclusion? Yeah, that's a great thing. What do you think about DEI? Oh, no, I don't want DEI. DEI is a bad thing, bad.
But you're totally right.
You see, it's just how let's decipher, let's break this down and let's look at it one-on-one. What are we really against? And no one can articulate that to me. What is it we're, not a rational person. I mean, you always got folks that on them opposite, extreme ends on any spectrum, but no one in a of sound mind, reasonable, rational person can tell me specifically what do they have against any of those issues. What is the argument that's being made? You know, if I get hired on a job and you don't like my performance, or you say I'm doing a subpar work and he's a DEI hire, well, come on, man. Maybe I was a bad hire, but you can't chalk that up to being something negative. You know what I'm saying? It's not about DEI. We're using that to broad brush anything we don't like that's of a minority nature.
Musk or President Trump, they decided that anything to do with black, we get rid of it. So I look at this in two ways. One is as a Christian, we're all God's children. You can't exclude anyone. So if you say you don't believe in inclusion, you're saying you don't believe that this word of God is for all areas and nations.
Yeah.
And just as a political issue, we've seen this movie before. We saw it in the 60s. We saw it during the George Floyd happening. So I'll stop there.
I'd also like to add, I mean, when we say DEI, it's taking on this as you mentioned, Dr. Harris, it's taking on this minority connotation. But when you break it down and folks realize I'm caught in the crosshairs of that, and they're talking about me. When we're talking about ladies, the women of DEI, you guys are part of that diversity piece there, right? Inclusive piece. You guys, black folks got the right to vote before you guys did. So you're a part of that minority issue. Black men did. And so when you talk about folks with disabilities, I mean, we're talking about you too. And folks say, oh, I was against DEI, now you're talking about me. I didn't know it was, I get caught up in that web of DEI. But when you break it down, it stops to take on such a negative connotation, and folks realize what it truly means and understand it. And then they're not as likely to be, opposed to it because the political machines have made it a negative thing. So. And by the way, when we're talking about keeping a group down or a race down or anyone down for that matter, in order to keep a man down, I think it was Martin Luther King said, you got to stay down with him. So just remember that.
I'm thinking about in the New Testament, there are political words like Lord and Messiah, which are political words for king, that then the church borrowed and said, actually, those political words are a faith word. You're talking about Jesus Christ. And it's interesting, in our time, the reverse is happening, where faith words are being co-opted as political words. Like diversity, equity, and inclusion, those words actually arise out of Christian faith tradition. Way before they were politicized, those are words about the beauty of God's creation, justice and equality, and God's love for all people. And as a pastor, I must admit, it is frustrating to see that some of the best of our history and theology co-opted by politics. So, Datrin, I want to make sure I quote this right. You talked about a willful ignorance.
Yes.
Is that right?
I think it's a voluntary.
Voluntary
Voluntary. I
ignorance.
mean, you tell me you don't see race. I mean, you just. I mean, how you tell me? Well, I don't care if you're blue green. There are no blue green people. Come on, people. We have to stop that. I mean, that's not reality. I don't see race. Yes, you do. You see me for who I am, right? You see Mr. Harris for who he is. And historically, that's always been the case. Black folks that are fair-skinned were more palatable, That's just the way it was. That's just the way it is. The darker you are, you're seen as more of a threat. They used to have that old saying, if you're white, you're right. You're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. That's the reality we're dealing with. So don't say you don't see color. You see me for who I am, right? There's no need for me to write that on my forehead. I can't hide the tan. I am who I am,
Thank you. My something I struggle with, and this could be an open dialogue that we'll get to in a few minutes, is why people choose it. The voluntary ignorance. So, which that assumes that people are choosing to be ignorant, and I wonder why. I want to think out loud with y'all.
I think
why?
when you do that, it forces you, as a Christian, as someone who's rational and reasonable, when you know better, you have to do better. If I tell you all the rules, then now you're accountable, right? So you prefer not to know them. I know that is at my house, right, kids? When I tell you the rules, you got to know them, and now I hold you accountable for them. But pleading ignorance is a good thing. If you don't know about me, now you're more susceptible and more willing to accept some of the stereotypes, some of the stuff you see on television, this whole idea that the black folks are come from single-family households. That's the majority of them. The whole idea that, hey, the majority of people on welfare are black. Well, they're figuring that out right now. That's just not that's a misconception. But you're more willing to accept that because you don't know. You're willing to accept that the household of the blacks and the young black man is a broken household, so they're a threat. You need a boogeyman. You need a bad person, it seems, and that bad person always seems to be the black people in general, unfortunately.
And I go back to something that Jim Wallace has in his book, and he talks about what are some things we can do to combat this rise in white nationalism. He uses the term proximity. Proximity means being in a relationship, being close to people who are different than you are. Being in the presence, having a relationship with somebody who's different than you are. It changes you. As Dr. King said, 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in our country. We don't see each other. We're not in the same spaces. We don't spend time asking about what is your story, what is your journey, what is your faith. And the more we do that, the less likely we are going to want to harm somebody. Because one of the things we find out is that we got more in common with them than we have as humans.
That's right. That's absolutely.
Listen, I'll just be transparent about it. When my daughter came out as a lesbian, before she did, I had these probably some traditional homophobic ideas. But because I knew my daughter and I loved her, I knew her heart, my whole attitude changed because I was in the presence of somebody whose sexual orientation was different than mine. When those white college students came to
And that's absolutely what it is. And I mentioned that in my discussion. We have to sit down and have the dialogue, get to know one another. My wife and I was at an event this weekend, and a guy from Arkansas, he thought it was acceptable to refer to us as color. That's this day and time. He had no ill will in his heart. Good brother, I know him, good guy. He just didn't see anything. But his exposures, his dialogue, if you will, with someone that looked like me was very limited, if any. Right? So that's voluntary ignorance. He didn't take it upon himself to go out and have those conversations with someone that looked like himself. Good brother, I still love him to death, and I'm still going to continue to break bread with him and have a good time with him. But that's just case in point, you know. I have kids. I went to one of my kids' school. He was in second grade, I believe, and a little kid comes out and said, "Are you Darren's parents?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Darren's parents." He said, "So are you guys like from Africa or something?" So their exposure, their interaction with folks that look like us was very limited. Purest comment or question that you could possibly ask was a second grade kid. She didn't have any ill will in her heart, but she was just, I won't say voluntary ignorance at that point. You're still trying to get educated. But we as adults, come on, you got folks that don't look like you, and you intentionally try not to converse with them. You intentionally try not to go to lunch with them. You intentionally try not to have a relationship with them. Why is that? Well, something we have to ask ourselves.
Want to ask this question and then open up the dialogue and have some questions from the crowd. I have, Patron, I told you on our Zoom call, I have some of the best Christians on earth here. And the vast majority happen to be white. What would you, and many of them are in the room tonight, what would you say to a mostly white church about what it's like being black in America today?
That's a difficult one. I can only speak to my experiences, as I said before. It varies. I mean, it depends on where you are. I can sit amongst you guys right now and I'm comfortable. But if I take any one of you guys and I put you amongst a black congregation that looked like that, you'd be uncomfortable. I've become comfortable because that's what we grew up. We go to school with you guys. We work with you guys. But you guys make it a point not to break bread, fellowship, and be amongst us, and it makes you uncomfortable. We have to acknowledge that. The only way for you to be comfortable in those situations is for you to do what? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. If I took you guys to my house and we had I won't say my house here because that's a different culture, but if I took you to my house in Mississippi, oh man, you'd be uncomfortable. Nobody's gonna hurt you. I guarantee you, it's the most loving situation you ever will find yourself in. Everybody will welcome you. It'll be like a big tailgate party in the house. Everybody shows you love. However, it seems that the reluctance to put yourselves in those situations is just always there and been there because of some misconceived or perception of who we are as a people. But in order for you to tear that down, you have to get uncomfortable. That's what I would say. As far as how I feel in any different given situation, I've been on the school board for 12 years. I served right after Ms. Linda Sasser here, a great friend of mine, she and Bob here. And this school district's been around for over 100 some odd years, Linda, right? I'm the second minority ever served on that board in over 100 some years. I'm talking about today. We like to dismiss things and say that's the way it used to be. That's why I'm glad we got Mr. Harris here to talk about civil rights. I'm after the fact. My mom tells me about the founders that were black versus white and having to go around back to eat, and you couldn't walk certain places and be certain places after a certain amount of time. I'm experiencing a different dynamic, a different culture. My kids will experience something even more so differently. But my point to that is, getting back to that point, we need to have us to be comfortable with one another, have conversations with one another. That way we can have empathy with one another. When you see that guy, if you're a police officer or you're watching the news and you see a police officer pull that black guy over, you won't be as quick to say, well, he deserved it. He ought to just listen. He ought to just conform. He ought to just show him his ID. He shouldn't have to. Police will show up at your house, and it's a black guy's house, and you say something, and you say something, and the interaction is way different that you're going to have than I would have, right? That's just the reality of it. Police pull me over, I got rules I have to abide by. You don't necessarily have to exhibit those rules. You can talk back, get smart, walk, open the door and tell him why he's pulling you over. No, I can't afford to do that. I teach my kids they can't do that. They got to live another day. And you'll watch that as Christians and say, well, they ought to just do what they tell them to do. They ought to just comply. He pulled him over. He must have had a reason to pull him over. Nah, he really didn't. You know? So those are some of the things, some of the experiences that we have that we take for granted in being the majority, if you will. You guys take for granted that we don't have the luxury of doing. Serving on the school board was one. I ran 12 years faithfully. And Aaron can tell you this. We ran the last election, and it was vicious. It was brutal. And you know who was the most brutal to me? Folks that proclaim to be Christian. Folks that proclaim to be on this crusade for God. One guy even told me, well, I'm doing this and this and this and this and this because I'm God's warrior. And I said, who told you God needed you to do anything? All right? I had people tell me that you're trying to keep Jesus and God out of school. What God you serve, right, that you could keep them out anywhere. And God's supposed to be within the teachers and the parents and the folks that go in. So how can we keep them out? You know, this is some of the nonsense that we heard. But I you know what? The folks that weren't of the faith didn't give us any problems at all. It was the folks that were supposedly devout in the faith and was doing God's work. Yeah. That's sad. And you sit there as supposed to be a Christian, and they want to diminish or make marginalize or make lesser of your religion because you don't feel the same way. You want me to crucify someone for being gay. That's a sin just like anybody else. I'm not crucifying you for getting a divorce or crucifying you from doing this or stealing or from you from coveting this or coveting that. One sin is a sin. I'm not trying to I know that this person is one of God's children. I'm going to treat him with the utmost respect. But you want me to crucify him. You want me to kick out and fire teachers because they got rainbows in their classroom. I thought God made that rainbow. How is it that we've hijacked the rainbow and made it a bad thing? This is all coming from folks of the faith, Christians as well, like Christians. And this is why we get so discouraged. I get discouraged being of the faith and being of a black man in the faith.
Hey, what questions would you, my friends, have for our esteemed panelists tonight? I don't mind walking around with the microphone.
All right, so this is for Datrin. Considering you're a person of color and your wife is a teacher in CISD, what are your thoughts of the lack of diversity right now on the board?
Well, you get what you. Sometimes you have to give them what they want. Unfortunately, that's what they wanted. They wanted this group that considered themselves white lady Christians group. You know, this is what they're touting and promoting. People felt like it was a time for a change, and I'm trying to understand what did that change, what prompted that. I think what we built. I stand on the shoulders of giants, the London Sasses, the Gerald Irons, the Bruce Tufts, the Tom Coxes, and all of the folks, the pillars of this community. I stand on their shoulders, and when I see that is what we have become, where we're putting kids aside, putting kids on the back burner, and we're all about this quest to be some white Christian women's school board, and we're proud of that. We're proud of lack of diversity. That's a sad state of being for where we are, especially in a community where we are, and we're so supposed to be so progressive as a community. It saddens me. What do I have to say about it? You know, the school board is not supposed to be a political position. I didn't ever make a decision based on my political affiliation. But I know some of you guys are big Toth fans, but this guy here is the Antichrist when it comes to schools. He's now pushing to have school board folks put Republican or Democrat by their name. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? The school board should be about the kids. You should put kids first. When I served on that board, I don't think it was many Democrats whatsoever on that board. Linda, would you say? It was maybe one or two or three of us. But I always was in agreement with the Republicans I served with. Like I said, I was the second minority of a serve over 100 years. Gerald was the first. And the only reason I signed up for that role was because Gerald asked me to. Believe me, it was not something I sought out for. But anyway, my point to that was we are trying to accomplish something that's in the best interest of our kids, our educators, and our taxpayers. Those are our priorities. Always kids first. When you polarize it and make it about Christianity, I don't serve just Christians. Yeah, I'm Christian. I serve Muslims. I serve Mormons. You know, I serve anybody, any faith that you possibly can fathom. We have it in this area, and we serve them all, right? And it's a public school system. Keep in mind, that means the public is welcome. At some point, we got to stop as Christians beating people upside the head and making them feel like they have to be Christian or they're bad, right? Our faith is the majority, and our majority needs to rule, and the majority needs to be present, and we need to do everything that we do according to the Christian faith. Well, hell, the Christian faith in itself, we can't even figure things out ourselves. We got so many denominations amongst the Christian faith. Who are we to tell someone else how they should worship and practice, especially when you come to education? We're not taking these kids to Sunday schools. Let the parents do that. Right, our job is to educate them and give them that great equalizer, a good quality education, where they can change their situations generationally. And that's what I was about. But what you see on that school board, it saddens me. I haven't watched the school board election since then, and I served on 12 years because it saddens me to see what's going on, that state of affairs. It saddens me that people got out there and voted simply based on what they perceived to be aligned interests with these folks because they were on that Republican ticket. They knew nothing. You know who beat me? A lady that's a furniture store manager. I don't think she's even doing that now. Furniture store manager, no college education, no experience in managing anything whatsoever over a certain dollar amount. I served on that board for 12 years. I got a CPA. My wife's an educator for over 25 years in the school district. I have 3 kids in that school district. And someone with no kids in the district, right? Not demeaning her profession whatsoever. I'm talking qualifications. And I lost handily after 12 years of service. So disappointed, that's the understatement of the night, you know. It was the same, yeah, absolutely. It was a presidential election. Everyone in Montgomery, just about, the majority of people turned out. I don't know what the actual numbers were. Aaron was our kind of person spearhead and all that, but there was no shortage of turnout. It was just people don't care about who they're voting for specifically to understand them. They just want to make sure that they're on the ticket that they're supposed to be aligned with. And that's what they did. But if you put us qualification, if you were going to employ us to run something, me and my opponent, hands down, I wouldn't even shown up. I knew I was going to win that deal. That was hands down deal. Qualifications to qualifications, not even a comparison. Not to be braggadocious, but that's just the facts.
Hi, I want to thank everybody for the talk tonight. It's really good. The question that I have is, when I was growing up, oftentimes when we talked about Black history, it was Rosa Parks, MLK, and then maybe you'll hear about somebody else. My children are 21, 19, 17. And sometimes when I actually talk to them about Black history, sometimes they're often seeing about, oh, you know, it's really sad, the things that happened in the 60s. And then even if you go back to talk about slavery. So one of the things that I heard about a year and a half ago was that when we talk about Black history, the point is for us to actually bring forth the good and what we have done and what we can do and what we, you know, did centuries ago. So my primary question is now this. I heard on the radio that when we actually talk about, and I'm going to say Rosewood, Tulsa, when we hear those stories, we hear about what we should now, what I'm now calling white history. White history are those who were mean, who burned the towns. And so now I try to rephrase to my children, Tulsa was a group of people who did this. They owned banks. They had movie theaters. They worked. They were all income levels. So my question to you is, are we now at a point to where we need to rephrase to our younger generation to not have them to deal with Black history trauma when we weren't the ones that were traumatic to ourselves? But it was that white history that actually brought in the negative and the ugliness.
I wholeheartedly disagree. I think my kids, I want my kids, they're old enough now where they can handle it uncut. I don't want them to see our life, my wife and our family lives through a scrapbook. You know, when y'all look at y'all's scrapbook, it's all happy times, right? You don't take pictures of sad times, right? So you don't understand the struggles that got you to those happy times, right? I'm not saying I want my kids to dwell on that past and to make excuses going forward, but I do want them to understand how we got to where we are and the strides we've made. And I want them to understand that never do you ever want to go back to this. Some of the things that they're seeing, you can better understand. They will be able to, I have 3 black sons, and they need to better understand why are they faced with this situation, or why are they faced with this situation, why is this systemic in America, where did that come from? Where did that superiority enrooted in some folks come from? They need to understand that. I don't want them at all not to fully understand. Some of the things that we say and do, I want them to understand what that actually means, right? We go and we talk about a cakewalk. We talk about hush puppies. We talk about a bunch of things that we talk about that you and I are very much aware of. They're not aware of. They see the innocence in that, but I want my kids to understand, man, that ain't all what is, no, we need to really understand the history of that, right? Because they're out here celebrating, doing all these things, unbeknownst to them, where that comes from. They would take a second, you know, review of how they conduct themselves when they hear and say and this kind of thing, you know. When you're saying nursery rhymes and you're talking about any, many, miny, and mo, I want my kids to understand where that came from. So, yeah. And a lot of you guys don't have no clue whatsoever what I'm talking about, right? But some of you do.
I think we must educate our children. We must tell them the truth. We must not sanitize it and whitewash it and try to isolate it. We need to be as truthful and as direct as we can, because so many people sacrifice so much to get us to where we are or where we were. And if Jackie Robinson. Oh, yeah, I was going to say that. Okay, next question. Who was the black woman who refused to give up her seat on the front of that bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955? Who was it? Oprah Winfrey? And see, at that point, I stopped laughing. It was no longer humorous to me, so I stopped. I said, we're not going to do this anymore. Tell me, why do you not know your history? Dr. Harris, these white teachers don't teach us anything about our history. And look, that's a cop-out. Don't blame this on your white teachers. It's true. They may not be teaching you your history. But let me ask you this. When you need to find the lyrics to a rap song, how do you find it? Oh, I get on that Google thing. I said that same Google machine that can give you lyrics to a rap song can tell you about your history too. So, my generation, we tried our best. And there's another generation that needs to step up and educate our children. A couple of days ago, and I do this every semester, a professor on campus invites me to come talk to some freshman students at Prairie View. And they want to know about my involvement in the civil rights movement and all the things that I went through. And I tell them I gladly do this. Sometimes I'm speaking at 3-4 classes back to back, and I'm exhausted, but I need to do this. And the reason I do it is I said, I'm a part of a cohort, and we're one of the last groups to really can tell stories authentically about the civil rights movement. I said, people my mom's age, the elders, they have passed on. Those that were at least 2 or 3 years younger than I am, they don't remember it. So I have an obligation to tell the stories that need to be told. And I get heartbroken sometimes when, and just the other day I asked the students, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but I'm going to be truthful. I asked the students what was the significance of the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. There were 25 black students in this class. Not a single person raised his hand. And this is at a black college, folks. And I'm saying, if we are that far behind, if we are not doing the job on our black campuses, what's going on at these PWIs? Because they've already told them at PWIs you can't do the DEI thing. But at a black college, I'm in my defiance mode a lot. I'm saying, I'm going to do it. I was retired before I took this job, and I can go back and be retired again. But just one other thing. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Because I'm getting wound up here. I need to slow down. I was going to go back to the school board. The other thing that Deidre and I have in common, in addition to being from Mississippi, I was on school board too in Commerce, Texas, and was on it for 15 years. And for a long time, I was the only black member of the school board. And I had this constant challenge to the administration. We need more black teachers. We need more black administrators. We've got a lot of black people in this community. We need more black representation. And they would not respond. And this white board member finally turned to me in anger. He said, Harris, that's all you want to talk about is racial issues. You need to just shut up. I said, the only way you get me to shut up is hire more black teachers and more black principals and more black. I'll be happy to shut up. And in fact, it ought to be you joining me. Yeah. In encouraging the administration to go out and hire more black teachers, because it's not just the black kids who need to see those black teachers, white kids, Hispanic kids, they all need to see those black teachers as well.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And it's unfortunate that we'll see a board like the Conroe ISD School Board as it is now, and we see nothing wrong with that. We don't see the value of diversity. We don't see the value of having another perspective that represents the constituents or the students that we serve. I served on that board for 12 years. You know how many people called me, had no idea who I was? They called me simply because one thing, they went to the website and they said, I can relate to him. Let me call him and see if he can help me resolve this issue. I was the default minority guy. Now, I wasn't going to jump up and down and yell racist to everything. I wanted to make sure it was a legitimate issue that needed to be addressed, and if it was, it's a respectful way to address things. And folks felt like they were being heard. They might not get the answer, just like I tell folks in my office. You may not get the answer you want, but you'll get an answer from me. You'll get my perspective, whether you like it or not. You're going to get it, right? And how you deal with it is up to you. But if it's warranted, accountability was a must for us on the school board when I served. I held the superintendents, I held the teachers, I held everyone I served accountable. And we did phenomenal things together. I have a good rapport with, I think I have a great rapport with all the folks that I serve. There's a way to be respectful and do those things. And most of the times when things were done that slighted one group or another, it was unintentional. It was because they didn't know. They didn't know.
Datron, who's standing in the breach to take over for you?
Oh, that's done. No one.
That's a challenge. That's.
We had an example. I tell you, when you talk about ignorance when you're dealing with teachers, it's not a bad thing. It's just ignorance when you're dealing with people. I won't say teachers, when you're dealing with people. My sons were typically minority. Well, they always have been minorities. We live right there in the heart of the Woodlands. Been there all their lives. Same house, 25 years. And they were at one of their schools, and the teacher sent home an assignment and was talking about the Civil War. I said, okay, let me see. I'm going to help you with your work. Let's go ahead and do this. And the question was, who would you want to be and who would you identify as during the Civil War period? That was a question for my son. The principal had no ill will in her heart whatsoever. But I had to write the answer. I said I would identify as a slave going through suffrage and bondage and my family being ripped apart and my identity being taken, and all in the name of Christianity and serving my master. That's who we would identify as. And I had a conversation with the principal because I had access to him, so I wanted to make sure. I didn't want to put her on the spot. I wanted to educate her. I said, would you have asked a Jewish kid where would he identify during the Holocaust? She had to think about that for a while. I said, I mean, did you really think about that when you send a black kid home? I said, why are y'all watching Gone with the Wind to give them an understanding of what the Civil War and the civil, I mean, pre-antebellum times were, slavery times were? Gone with the Wind. I said, you got to be kidding me. But this is what I mean when we say we got to have someone at the table having that discussion. I had one of the teachers also say, we're talking about band instruments, let's pick out band instruments. And kids with thick lips, y'all probably shouldn't steer toward these instruments because they're going to be harder to use those instruments, specifically the trumpet. I sent her pictures of Louis Armstrong, right? I said, let me ask you something.
Dizzy Gillespie.
If I would have sent home a flyer, and she said, well, Datron, it's not about a race. I said, come on. Now, see, this is a voluntary ignorance, right? The thick lips, the curly hair, that's traits of blacks. Come on, you can't, let's not dance around this. When you say that, you're ostracizing and making a kid feel lesser than based on something they have no control over, right? And you don't ever want to tell a kid they can't do something because of something that they have no control over. Case in point, Louis Armstrong. And the other jazz musicians that are out there. But I sent her a picture of him because I never would forget that. Well, my point to that is she had no ill will in her heart. I said, let's send that flyer home to the parents and tell them, look, we got football tryouts coming out. Unless you're tall, skinny, and can run extremely fast, I don't want you trying out for wide receiver. How well would that have gone over? I had a football coach tell my kid, you got to cut all your facial hair because that's how the kids need to look. We need to all match. I said, all the facial hair? He said, yeah, all the facial hair. He said, no. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's just not of us. When you see black men, you mostly will see them. I said, politicians with facial hair. We get ingrown hairs, and it's a whole nother thing behind it. And I said, I can tell him cut this low and cut this off, but cut this low, but I'm not going to tell him color his hair off. So the coach was like, no, we got to all look alike. I said, I tell you what, this ain't the military. And I said, Coach, how many people on your staff look like me? He said, none. I said, you can see how some of the things you send home or you request or demand of the kids may be perceived as insensitive. I said, tell all the kids to cut their hair 1 inch, and I'll have my kid cut his hair 1 inch. And you tell all those kids with those pretty curly goldy locks to go home and tell their parents they got to cut all that off And you see how well that's received in your community. In my community, we'd be fine with it, because I'll cut that hair down and we'd be good. But when it comes to their community, that's prized, and they don't want to do that. So I said for the coaches, you genuinely want them all to look alike. Let's do military style. Let's cut all that hair off the head and make it down to 1 inch. And then we'll all be clean shaven and we'll all look alike. So that my point was, he wasn't seeing it from that perspective. He was only seeing it from his perspective. Black men don't shave, typically. It depends on the texture of your hair, but most don't shave. Straight razors, it causes ingrown hairs. Most of y'all don't realize that. Right? The more coarse your hair is, you can't do that. These are things that you're not necessarily sensitive to because you don't have anyone at the table. When we get ready to do hiring, when you got a panel of whites and they're looking through resumes, they're going to hire folks that they're comfortable with. They're going to hire the Johns, the Josh, the Adams, the Susies, right? They're not going to hire the Lakeishas. They're not going to hire the Shaniquas. They're not going to hire that because they don't fit into the culture. That's the justification. Culturally, they probably wouldn't fit in here, right? That's just the reality of it. But we need to educate ourselves on that, be cautious, be conscious of it, and make an attempt, right, to not do it. Because when you do that, because we had this problem in CISD at one point, and we had to force it on them. The panelists that were hiring all the teachers looked like, it almost looked like a white sorority. And I had to tell them, I said, man, why does this school look like a white sorority? This is just ridiculous. You don't have one black teacher and there's 80 on the campus.
Yeah.
I said, this is not mimicking the students that they serve. They had no idea. They couldn't see that. They just couldn't see it. So a lot of things get done out of ignorance that otherwise wouldn't get done if you had someone sitting at that table. A lot of companies get in trouble because of that. A lot of companies get in trouble. A lot of these corporations, they putting out stuff without vetting it with people of diverse backgrounds, ladies, blacks, Hispanics, sitting at the tables, and a lot of bad decisions get made. If you take a group of accountants, 5 accountants sitting at the table, and you let them run a company, at this table I got a salesman, an engineer, an accountant, a diverse group. They're going to run circles around that group all day long because that group is classic redundancy. This group is diverse, bring a whole different set of ideas per person, and they're going to be more dynamic in how they do things. That transcends into everything we do. So don't see it as a negative, right, that you have diversity. See it as a positive, right? Don't feel like it's a good thing not to have inclusivity. Don't feel like it's a good thing that all your friends are white. Don't feel like it's a good thing that you've never been over a black person's house. You've never broke bread with them, gotten to know them. That's not a good thing, right? You are missing out on a whole world of experiences, of cultural understanding, and thereby being able to empathize with those folks. I said a lot.
I love it, brother. Yes. Nick.
Yeah, I apologize. I got in a little bit late from work, but I really enjoying the discussion, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to join and be here. A question: I try to be a good ally to everybody, and particularly at work with the diversity that we have there. Do you have some stories from your travels on what it looks like when there's good allyship from someone that looks like me, for folks in a community that don't, what that looks like to be a good ally, some things to inspire?
I'm gonna have good allyship because I'm that type of person. If I don't know you, I'm gonna get to know you. And once you get to know me, you'll find that we'll have much more in common than you ever would imagine. And so once I do that, it bridges the gap for you to get to know other folks, right? Because I'm gonna introduce you to other folks. I'm gonna say, hey, I didn't get your name. What's your name? Nick. I'd be like, hey, John or Josh or Jeff or Jakari, you met Nick? And these people might look like me because I want them to understand what a great person you are, and vice versa. I want you to understand what great people they are, right? Because when we know folks, when we know the folks we work with, regardless of race or background, and we have a certain amount of relationship with them, we're less likely to have issues at the office. We're less likely to have misunderstandings. You might say something to me in passing by that if I didn't have a relationship with you, guess what I'm doing? I'm running HR. But because I know you and I know it's coming from a place of love or it's innocent, I have a relationship with you, I'm gonna bring that to your attention. I'm saying, Nick, you know, you said such and such the other day. I don't think you meant it this way, but this is how I took it. So my point to that is get to know the folks you work with. Be an ally to everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Nick, and I think we are blessed and fortunate at this church, even though it is a predominantly white church. I feel that I have allies here. I've not always felt that way. Under a previous pastor, when I came back, my wife and I lived in Atlanta for 7 years, and we came back here, and the pastor was here, and I kept asking, can't we do something for Black History Month? The shortest month in the year. Let's do something. Let's talk about Richard Allen or Absalom Jones and some of these pioneers in the Methodist movement. And nobody wanted to do anything. But I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to stop pushing. Because it's one thing, if I don't speak out on it, it's probably not going to get spoken about. So I pushed the pastor, and he finally agreed. We sat right here on stools, and I did both services, the first service and the second service, and he and I had a conversation about civil rights. And this pastor got so much pushback from members of the congregation who said, don't bring politics into the church anymore. We don't want to hear that kind of stuff in here. And that was the end of it. We never did have any more of those kinds of programs. But when this social justice group got going, I mean, here tonight, this was, even though they consider me the leader of the social justice group, this was not my idea. I mean, somebody was asking me, Anthony, what are we going to do for Black History Month? I don't know. Okay, do you have some ideas? And Michelle and some other people came up with some things. So that's allyship. That's somebody that you can share the burden with, somebody who has some empathy and not a paternalistic attitude like they feel sorry for you, but somebody who's I'm here with you. I'm here going to fight with you. I'm not going to take the lead, but if you need me to take the lead, I'll do that. I'm going to respect your history and your background and the struggle that you've been through. I'm not going to come in but allyship, and that's how we made it through the movement. Adrian, I'm from that generation.
I understand. I respect.
And I can still relate to this generation. We had allies. We had people from the Jewish community. We had people from different parts of the country come and work with us. We had people who were quite educated. We had people who had no education. But it takes all of that and the burden, and that's how I look at it sometimes, the burden, if it falls on one person's shoulder, you can get burned out on that. And it's kind of like that rubber band that gets stretched, that elasticity can only go so far. And if there's not somebody there to say, let me help you with this, you don't have to stretch so far. That's important. I think we show signs of having that at this congregation.
And I agree. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Pastor David. I had a conversation with the pastor and Michelle and Dr. Harris before this. They were trying to size me up and get to know me, which is good, right? I appreciate that. But unbeknownst to them, I was doing the same thing. And I said, look, guys, if y'all are looking just to check a box and make everybody feel warm and fuzzy, I'm probably not your guy. I'm going to tell you the most respectful way. I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to unnecessarily offend anyone. Sometimes offense is warranted, but I don't want to unnecessarily offend anyone. But I do want to be candid. That's the only way for us to have progress, to make strides toward in the right direction. So kudos to the pastor for allowing me to be candid and open with you guys and share my perspective in the most respectful way as I possibly can, but at the same instance be candid and honest with you guys. So.
And Datron, let me just say again how blessed we are and how fortunate we are and how thankful we are to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
As part of this program. As I said in our meeting, sometimes people need to hear that same message from somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay, and you alluded to that.
Understood.
That, there are some things that I will say because people keep hearing it from me, but to hear someone else say it, oh, now I get it. And I think that's what we've done tonight. Do we have some other questions from the audience?
Look, I didn't pull punches. I was trying to be the most respectful person as I possibly could on the board. I have a low tolerance for ignorance and foolishness, right? Ignorance and when you just chose not to want to know was one thing. But foolishness, when you're just up there being a clown, I have very little tolerance for that. I'm not on the board anymore. I never tried to be a politician, so I didn't have those groups to be beholden to, right? I didn't have this. When I left off of those board after every board meeting, I didn't have anybody I had to answer to other than my wife. I didn't have people calling me and say, hey, why did you say this? Hey. I articulated myself quite well as to my position on anything that came up, and I made sure everyone understand what I stood for. I wanted to do that to the very end, and in the beginning, in the first 10 years, there was not much need for that, right? In the last 2 years, it was more need for that than in all 12 combined, because you had folks there that didn't have the right intentions. They didn't have a heart for kids. They had a heart for self and selfish aspirations. And so, yes, I would think I was, but I have to defer to some of the folks that I served. I wouldn't say my goal was not to be reelected, but when I was at the poll, I said, I ran. I ran hard. Aaron, would you say? I mean, I was there 24 as much as I possibly could be. I did everything I could to win. I had endorsements from, countless pillars in this community. Ms. Sasser, one of them. The teachers' endorsement, but that was outweighed by folks who showed up and ignorant to what was at stake, and they voted based on party politics, and that's what it was. And but no, my intentions were to run and be reelected. Absolutely. I told them, and Aaron can attest to this. I told them if I'm running to win, and I did exactly that. I ran fiercely. But in the same instance, I had a lot of folks threaten me that, hey, you're not going to get reelected. And I told them, don't threaten me with a good time.
We've got one last question over here, and then we're going to close in prayer.
Okay. Thank you.
Not sure how to ask this. It was a small comment made about interaction with the police and your son, and being someone that has been roughed up several times by police. I'm wondering how that attitude is actually healthy in teaching your sons to respect public servants and to build better public servants in our community by keeping this attitude or that perspective alive in the next generation.
I'm not sure how to answer it. I have to teach my kids to be cautious and understand that everyone's intentions aren't pure. Law enforcement specifically, I'm not telling them not to be disrespectful. I'm telling them to have the utmost respect for law enforcement. But again, my kids can't afford to be aggressive, or be hostile, to be combative. They can't. They're black men, right? We're perceived as being hostile. We're perceived as being argumentative. We're perceived as being aggressive. I'm talking about perception. I'm not talking about reality. And all that comes into play when you're dealing with someone pulling up behind you late at night with a flashlight and got their hands on a gun, right? I can't afford to have my kids be complacent, right? And you're saying, in some instances, I hear people say, well, what is that? I'm not trying to hear that. What I'm trying to understand is my kids need to come through that door at night alive, right? I'm not trying to be PC. I'm not trying to look out for the next generation. I'm trying to make sure my kids survive, right? That's what it's all about for us, right? Because I know that if my kids were oblivious to the rules, if you will, uppity black men, if you will, as we were called oftentimes, they may not come home. They may not get to tell their story. So I tell them behaving. I'm not telling them disrespect cops. That's another misconception, a fallacy, that we are teaching our kids not to disrespect law enforcement or authority. We're teaching our kids to be cautious of who they are and how they're perceived. That's what we're teaching our kids. I'm teaching my kids, he can't go over such and such house and have a sleepover, right? Because if something were to transpire, I suspect, I'm not saying that this is going to case, but history has taught me to suspect that my kid is the one going to be left holding the bag. My kid is going to be the one that I need to go get a lawyer for, right? I have to be cautious of that as a black man, and I cannot be derelict in my duties of being their father just because I'm afraid that they may be perceived or they perceive law enforcement in a certain way. I think they're going to formulate that on their own, but while they're with me, I need to teach them, right, the rules of being a black man when it comes to being out there. So.
And if I could just add, and I just want to echo what Datron said, we want our sons to come home alive. We don't want to visit them in the jail. We don't want to visit them at the hospital. We don't want to go to the morgue to identify their bodies. So sometimes we just have to tell I had to tell my black son, keep your hands at the 10 and 2 position. Say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. As much as it may bother you and you may think it affects your manhood, don't do that, because I want you to come home. I want you to walk through that door. My son was stopped in Austin, Texas, and I saw the dash cam video of what the police officers did. They didn't treat him right. They didn't beat him, but they didn't treat him right. My wife has never seen that video. I have seen it, and I don't want her to see it, because the way my son was treated, despite what I had told him about the 10 and 2 and how he's supposed to conduct himself, he still got pulled over. Yeah. George Floyd did what the officers told him to do, and they still murdered him. So even though we tell our children to be vigilant, keep a head on a swivel, don't do anything to provoke anybody, even with that, sometimes you still get caught up by somebody who is up to no good.
That's just the reality of it. It's unfortunate. Do we want to live in that type of state of? No, we don't. No one wants to live like that. But that's what we've been taught. History has taught as well. It's justified. We want to make sure that our kids survive. Of all races, the black male is looked upon as the most threat. Why? Most aggressive, most hostile. Some of these other buzzwords you hear all the time. Intimidating, you make me feel uncomfortable. All these words we hear, it oftentimes is kind of the default terminology. I felt threatened. Why did he get shot? I felt threatened. Young brother in Dallas having ice cream, studying to be an accountant in his apartment, minding his own business.
Got shot, killed.
Somebody walks in the wrong apartment, law enforcement. I'm not saying all law enforcement bad, not at all. That's a misconception, once again. Right. But when he got shot and killed, there's a lot of people felt like that lady was justified. In his apartment, he raised up, she said she saw something, so she shot him. Shot him, killed him. And we dismissed that as, well, it happens. If that was a young white lady did that, young white teenage girl that did the very same thing, that'd be, you wouldn't be able to palate that as easily. But because it was a black man, it's much, much more palatable, right?
Right on.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you another story. I used to be all for corporal punishment in schools. I got corporal punishment. They powdered me. Right? I never forget it, so it worked. That's what it is. But when you study who was actually getting corporal punishment, it'll quickly make you understand that we can't do this anymore. The majority of the kids that were getting corporal punishment, paddling, beaten, I won't say beaten, but paddling, black males. The second group, black females. The next group, white males. The next group, white females. Now somebody's going to justify that statistic. They're the most unruly. No, it was just more palatable to beat them or paddle them. That's what my kids cannot be ignorant of. This is reality of it. So. But anyway, I digress. Pastor, thank you.
I have a lot of people to thank, and I'm going to miss you. I'm sorry. To my social justice class friends, thank you. Thank you very much. To our guests and visitors who this is your first time gracing our church, thank you. Blessed are you for giving church a try tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Dr. Harris, thank you very much. Datron, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you all for being here. This is exciting. Great.
Hey, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. And may the Lord lift up his face to shine upon you and give you peace.